Tension filled the Washington, D.C. Community Hall after heated political speeches at a charity event. Suddenly, Elon Musk's young son X asked to speak. What the boy said about unity stunned the crowd, leaving even Donald Trump in awe of a hidden truth. The Community Hall in Washington, D.C. felt like a microcosm of America itself. Worn gray walls, scuffed wooden floors, and flickering fluorescent lights humming overhead. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the space, occupied by a diverse crowd, educators in modest attire, business leaders in tailored suits, and local families clutching programs for the children's education charity event. A small stage stood at the front, framed by a fraying red curtain. A microphone waited, ready to carry voices of hope over the low hum of conversation. The air held a hint of brewed coffee from a table near the entrance, where pastries sat untouched, overshadowed by the tension crackling beneath the surface. A tension born of political divides and whispered opinions. Donald Trump sat near the side of the hall, his blonde hair catching the harsh light, his suit a stark contrast to the hall's humble setting. He crossed his arms, jaw tight, his gaze sweeping over the crowd with practiced intensity. He'd come for the cause, a rare public appearance at a charity event, hoping to lend his name to something good, something untainted by controversy. Yet the crowd's reaction was palpable. Some offered nods of respect, others shot glances of suspicion, their murmurs forming a quiet storm around him. Trump felt the familiar weight of judgment, the unspoken question of whether he belonged here, whether he could truly contribute to a cause meant to heal and unite. A question he'd asked himself more often than he'd admit. Elon Musk sat closer to the stage, his sharp features softened by the dim light, his posture relaxed but attentive. Beside him was his 5-year-old son, Evelyn, called X by those who knew him, a small boy with his father's curious eyes and a halo of curls that tumbled with every fidget. X wore a tiny navy blazer over a star-patterned shirt, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his blazer, his wide eyes taking in the room with innocent fascination. He'd come with Elon to this rare public outing, a chance to see the world and feel its energy. X had been shaped by his nanny Evelyn, whose teachings about kindness and God's love had taken root in his young heart. Lessons that would soon ripple through this room in ways no one could foresee. The event began with a nervous MC, a young woman whose voice trembled as she welcomed the crowd, her words a plea for unity in supporting children who needed books, schools, and dreams. She introduced Elon, who rose to speak, his tone measured as he emphasized the transformative power of education. His words met with a mix of applause and polite nods. X clapped enthusiastically, his small hands a blur, his face beaming with pride for his father. But the crowd's energy shifted as the next speaker, a local politician, took the stage. Her remarks stirred murmurs of dissent. Some agreed with her call for policy change, others scoffed, their skepticism a reminder of the fractures that ran deep. These fractures seemed to widen with every word, every glance, every unspoken divide. X sensed the unease. His young heart picked up on the way people sat stiffly, their smiles forced, their voices tinged with something heavy. He didn't understand politics or know the history behind the tension, but he felt the lack of warmth, the absence of the love Evelyn had taught him about, the love he believed in, the love he wanted to share. He turned to Elon, his curls bouncing as he leaned close, his voice a soft whisper in the noisy hall. "Daddy," X whispered, his eyes searching Elon's, his small hands clasped together. "Can I talk to the people? I want to tell them something." The atmosphere had grown taut, the air heavy with unspoken disagreements. The MC returned to the stage, her nervous smile faltering as she sensed the room's unrest, her voice barely cutting through the murmur as she announced the next speaker. But before she could finish, a small figure stepped forward. X, inspired by his nanny's teachings, climbed onto the stage with determination that belied his age. His curls bounced with each step, his tiny navy blazer slightly askew. His hands rested at his sides as his curious eyes scanned the sea of faces with clarity that seemed to pierce through the discord. The MC hesitated, then lowered the microphone to his height, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity, mirroring the crowd as they leaned forward, intrigued by this young child. "Everyone should love each other," X began, his voice small but steady, ringing out like a clear bell in the quieted hall, each word a gentle hammer against the walls of discord. "Like God does. He loves us all, even when we're mad. We should love like that too, so we can be happy, so we can be friends, so we can be good." The simplicity of his words struck the crowd like a tidal wave, washing away tension, softening the edges of hardened expressions, melting skepticism into something softer, something vulnerable, something human. Eyes that had been narrowed in judgment now glistened with unshed tears. Hands that had been crossed in defiance now relaxed, and hearts that had been closed now opened, if only for a moment, if only in this space, if only in the presence of this small boy whose words carried wisdom beyond his years. Trump felt the impact deep in his chest, a sudden tightness that made his breath catch, his hands unclenching as a wave of emotion surged through him. X's words, "like God does," echoed in his mind, stirring memories of a time when he'd believed in a world where love could overcome division. A time before the choices he'd made had built walls around his heart, walls he'd accepted as part of his role, part of the man he'd become. But this child's voice, so pure, so untainted, had broken through those barriers, reminding him of a hope he'd buried, a hope he now wanted to reclaim, to nurture, to share. A hope that made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, something raw, something real, something that felt like a call to be better. Elon watched from his seat, his features softening further, his hands trembling slightly with pride he couldn't contain, mixed with awe at the small boy who'd spoken with such clarity, such innocence, such love. He thought of Evelyn, whose teachings had inspired this moment of truth. The crowd remained silent, their applause delayed, their breaths held, their hearts touched by the words of a child. Words that had cut through the noise, that had softened the divides, that had shone with a light that seemed to fill the hall. A light that would soon lead to a moment of connection, a moment of promise, a moment of hope in a divided world. Backstage, a narrow hallway stretched away from the main hall, its gray walls lined with peeling posters of past events. A single light flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows on the floor. The faint hum of the crowd lingered in the distance, a reminder of the silence that had followed X's speech. A silence that had held the room in a tender grip. A silence that had spoken of a love so pure, so simple, so profound that it had softened the hardest hearts. Donald Trump stood near a door at the end of the hallway, his suit slightly rumpled from the evening's emotional weight. His face was a canvas of raw emotion, his eyes glistening with tears he'd shed in silence. Tears he'd hidden from the world, tears that spoke of a vulnerability he'd never let himself feel. A vulnerability stirred by the words of a small boy that had cut through the noise of his life. Words that had reminded him of a hope he'd buried, a hope he now wanted to reclaim. He thought of X's speech, Everyone should love each other like God does. And the way it had pierced him made him see the divides he'd helped create, the walls he'd built, the wounds he'd inflicted not just on others, but on himself, on his own heart, on his own belief in a world where love could be the answer. X approached him, his small steps echoing softly in the hallway. His navy blazer was slightly askew, the star-patterned shirt beneath a quiet nod to the dreams he held, dreams of a 5-year-old who saw the world with a clarity that adults often lost, a clarity that had silenced the room, that had pressed against the divides, that had whispered of a love that could heal, that could bridge, that could make the world a better place. His curls bounced as he stopped in front of Trump, his curious eyes searching the man's face, his small frame a beacon of light in the dim hallway. A light that had shone brighter than the tension, brighter than the divides, brighter than anything in the hall. "Mr. Trump," X said, his voice a gentle chime, his eyes wide with sincerity that seemed to fill the space. His small hands clasped together in a gesture of trust, a gesture of love, a gesture of hope. "Will you help people love each other like I said, like God does?" Trump's breath caught, his hands trembling, his eyes glistening with fresh tears, his heart a storm of emotions he'd never let the world see. Emotions stirred by X's words, by his question, by the innocence, by the truth, by the love that seemed to fill the hallway, to press against the divides, to whisper of a world he wanted to believe in again. He knelt down, his suit creasing as he met X's gaze, his eyes glistening with fresh tears, his voice rough with emotion, his words a quiet confession, a reflection of the man beneath the spotlight. A man who'd acted in ways the world often judged. A man who'd built walls where he could have built bridges. A man who now wanted to try again, to be better, to be the man he'd once hoped to be. "I want to, X," he said, his voice a whisper, his words a quiet prayer, a quiet promise, a quiet hope. "I'll try. I promise I'll try." Trump stood, his hand gently resting on X's shoulder. A gesture of connection, of commitment, of a promise that felt like a prayer, like a hope, like a light in the darkness. A promise that would soon be sealed with a moment of shared love, a moment of shared hope, a moment that would soon unfold in the courtyard beyond this hallway. The courtyard outside the Washington, D.C. Community Hall was a small haven tucked between the building's brick walls. A single cherry blossom tree stood at its center, its bare branches reaching into the deep indigo sky where the first stars began to shimmer. Their faint light a quiet reminder of something eternal, something enduring, something that felt like hope in a world too often shadowed by division. A few benches lined the edges, their wood worn smooth by years of visitors seeking a moment of peace, a moment of reflection, a moment of connection. The cool evening air carried the scent of damp earth, a whisper of spring on the horizon, a whisper of renewal, a whisper of love that seemed to linger from the moment inside the hall. Donald Trump stood beside X, the 5-year-old whose speech had pierced his heart, whose question, "Will you help people love each other?" had cut through the walls he'd built. Walls that had kept out the vulnerability, the hope, the love that now filled this courtyard, that now filled his heart, that now filled this moment with a light that seemed to shine brighter than the divides, brighter than the darkness, brighter than anything he'd felt in years. Trump's suit was slightly rumpled now, his blonde hair catching the faint starlight, his eyes still glistening with the tears he'd shed in silence. Tears that spoke of a change and a shift, a promise he'd made to this small boy. A promise he now wanted to keep, a promise he now wanted to honor, a promise that felt like a prayer, like a hope, like a light in the darkness. X stood close, his navy blazer slightly askew, his star-patterned shirt a quiet testament to the dreams he held. His hands rested at his sides, his curls bouncing as he looked around the courtyard, his curious eyes bright with a joy that seemed to fill the space. To press against the darkness, to whisper of a love that could heal, that could bridge, that could make the world a better place. He bent down, his small hands reaching for a tiny daisy growing between the cracks in the courtyard's pavement. Its white petals were soft against the gray stone, its yellow center a quiet promise of spring, of renewal, of hope. A promise that seemed to echo the promise Trump had made. God made this for us to share, X said, his voice a gentle chime, his eyes searching Trump's, his small hands holding out the daisy. A gesture of trust, a gesture of love, a gesture of hope that seemed to press against the divides in Trump's heart, to whisper of a world he wanted to believe in again. You can have it, Mr. Trump, so you remember to help people love each other. Trump took the flower, his hands trembling, his eyes glistening with fresh tears, his heart a storm of emotions he'd never let the world see. Emotions stirred by X's words, by his gesture, by the innocence, by the truth, by the love that seemed to fill the courtyard, to press against the divides, to whisper of a world he wanted to fight for again. A world where love was the answer, where God's love was the light, where hearts could heal, where bridges could be built. He tucked the flower into his suit pocket, a quiet promise, a quiet prayer, a quiet hope, a quiet light that would guide him, that would remind him, that would shine in the darkness, in the divides, in the moments when he needed it most. I'll remember, X, Trump said, his voice rough with emotion, his words a quiet vow, a reflection of the man beneath the spotlight. I'll do my best to help people love each other, to make things better, to be the man you think I can be. From that night on, Trump carried X's words in his heart, a quiet promise that led him to a small act of unity. A donation to a local program that brought children from different backgrounds together. A program that taught them to love, to share, to see the good in one another. A program that felt like a flower, like a prayer, like a light in the darkness. X's bond with Trump became a symbol of hope in a divided world. A symbol of the power of innocence, of the power of truth, of the power of love. A symbol that shone brighter than the divides, brighter than the darkness, brighter than anything in this world. A symbol that would shine forever in the hearts of those who knew, in the hearts of those who believed, in the hearts of those who loved.